and gentlemen.
Okay, so first of all, let me introduce myself.
Yeah.
For the camera, for the people, Quame Love, a professor here, academic coordinator at UC Berkeley, but AKA Superstar Quame Law, underground veteran, they like to say. Locally for hip hop would be 60s, 70s, New York City, South Bronx, very specific, very localized area to where hip hop was born out of. I see the center for hip hop being the DJ. So then I would start with some of the more popular names like a Kool Herc, a Bambaataa, and then a Grandmaster Flash, right? Who I would say are the three if we're just looking at the magical number 3, being like the 3 forefathers who each brought something specific to the birth of hip hop, all 3 being DJs, right? Then I would say another part of authenticity is strictly just looking at the culture. A large part of hip hop is specific to New York, the New York terrain, the New York environment, and the culture that's there. The culture in New York is a hodgepodge of West Indian, strong West Indian culture, African American culture from the Great Migration coming up from the South, right, is probably 2 of the larger cultural influences going on. Right, and so then I would say if you're looking at the culture, you have to locate the 5 elements, right? And I would put the DJ first. So first you have the DJ, and a lot of people say graffiti, right? And you have the break dancer, right? So that's real hip hop dance, it's break dancing, by the way. It's not all the other stuff. And then you have, a lot of people say beatbox, right? And then the last component was the MC. Ironically, the last element to be born within like this cultural explosion, right? That was all these elements were happening simultaneously. Was the MC, and the DJ actually was the MC originally. And so the musical component, hip hop or rap music didn't exist during the birth of hip hop as a culture, right? It was all born out of break beats. The break beats kind of formed the nucleus, right, for all the events, for the pulse, right, the energy, for a lot of what the music then became as it formed into an actual kind of musical category. So that's how I would look at authentic hip hop. And then from there it spreads. It spreads from a very specific local kind of folk area, specific to South Bronx in New York, to Philly, Miami, Texas, Los Angeles, Seattle, what have you. It spreads all the way over the world. And then, you know, Japan would probably have whiffs of it before a lot of different local places in the States. A lot of other states had it. You know, a lot of Europeans were documenting it, you know, early.
So given the definition you just gave of what hip hop is, would you say what's going on right now locally is still hip hop, and globally, like Japan and places like that, is that still hip hop?
Well, I would probably have to categorize it to distinguish between what's going on. So you have this, I would say authentic hip hop not only has it's exclusive to space, but also to time, right? And so you have, after a certain time period, after it moves, it's no longer authentic, because a lot of the pioneering and the authentic building that was going on, the original DJ, the original cutting, the original first scratches, right? The original lyrical patterns and all of these things were being born within a certain time period. Then after that, there was a lot of repetition that started to go on, right? And so certain traditions were born during this authentic era. And you know, I won't mess you up and just give a specific date, because I don't want people coming to my door. But after that, I would say we go into a period of being pure. So what Los Angeles is doing, it may not be authentic because a lot of the model, right? The skeleton has already been created, but they're doing it for their culture. They have their cultures revolving around cars, roller skating, and gangbanging, right? And so when they get a whiff of kind of like the 5 elements, they work it within to their cultural regime. And so, you know, someone can make an argument then it becomes authentic to them. I say no, because hip hop, just the term itself, is a New York term. So if you're going to use the term hip hop, then it's authentic to New York. Anything else, it might be pure, right? They do it from their cultural standpoint, and it becomes pure. And then, so if I had to look globally, right? For me, it's ripples, it's waves, and you know, it can only be pure once it leaves like the authentic, the epicenter, right? And so I would say the whole, what colonization does is it comes in, it's a foreign regime, right? It's a dominant regime that comes in and it disturbs, it disrupts the tradition, the local regime or way of life, the local culture. And so once it does that, not only does it do that physically, you know, for the purpose of getting the resources, right? What's left is a psychological effect, because now the local culture has a certain amount of power and value is placed on the colonial, the foreign regime that is coming, right? So their education, their religion, their societal values become kind of forced onto the people, and that's kind of then they're forced to kind of simulate, right, in order to survive now, because that's become their dominant system. So it's like a psychological warfare, and you know, the goal is to then hold on to a lot of the traditional values, which no longer don't serve a purpose within this colonialism, because now it's all based on money and right? So for hip hop, you know, that same thing. Now we're talking about a people, African people, who were kind of brought into, who almost pawns within the colonization of the Americas, right? So African people weren't a part of the process in the same way that the Europeans were. So we're actually very much like the Native Americans who were kind of the victims of the colonies that came here to the Americas, and our culture then has the consequence or is threatened, right, by the colonial regime. And so that's what happens in America, because the colonial regime is capitalism, right? It's these Western values that may go against African, now black American, African American values, right? And so that's what hip hop is. Hip hop is African diasporic, based on African diasporic values. And capitalism has come in and says, okay, we see something valuable, and it comes in through the form of record companies, right? And or larger companies, videos, and they say, okay, in order for us to sell it by what we deem as valuable, and how we've kind of inculcated the mindset in the larger society, the mainstream society, you know, we have to run it through this machine, this filter. And so that's what people take on. And so that's what happens since that process starts and happens here in the Americas, in North America, where hip hop is born. And it makes only sense then that what gets appropriated And what people think they're getting as hip hop in other countries, a lot of times it's really the effect of the colonial regime going through that machine, right? Dominant powers. So a lot of times it's not even hip hop.